Welcome to Team Building Cultures, the podcast designed to deliver tools and tips for improving team communication, collaboration, and fostering a culture where teams thrive. Now, here's your host, Beverly Hathorn, owner of Strategic HR Consultants.
Hello, listeners, and thank you so much for joining me with another episode of Team Building Cultures. I am Beverly Hathorn, your host. I am also owner of Strategic HR Consultants. And today I'll be speaking with Jenn Bieri. Jenn is the founder of Move with Jenn, and she empowers people to become the CEO of their own life through intuitive life coaching, yoga, and energy healing. So we're going to get some good stuff today. Before she started Move with Jenn, she spent 10 years building a career as a chartered accountant in finance and business operations in Toronto, Canada. She was also a junior executive at a tech startup and built their back office, which was the corporate, the finance, and the business operations. She built those functions to support their growth from 40 to 400 people. Amazing. She's also transitioned careers many times. She's been an auditor in public accounting. She's managed finance teams in travel and tech, and she's built a business operations team from scratch. So she is very fluent in team building, and she's now running her own business. That's all such exciting information. And Jenn, I'm so happy to have you on the show today. Thank you for joining me.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me here. Now I'm like blushing right now after that introduction.
You
So
should
thank you.
be. That's a lot of good stuff. So I'm going to start out talking about your 10 years career as a chartered accountant. What is a chartered accountant? Help enlighten us on that.
Yeah. So in Canada, so actually Canada and the US kind of do this similarly. So chartered accountant, I think it's a CPA, chartered professional accountant in the US. And so
Okay.
basically, most people that have a chartered accountant or a CPA is, they spend some time working in public accounting. So, if you think of some of like the big four accounting firms like KPMG, PwC, Ernest and Young, things like that. And so, or I didn't do big four. I did a Grant Thornton, which is I think it's considered top 5 or 6, but anyway, it's more of like a mid-tier public accounting firm. And so if someone has done their chartered accountant, typically they've had to go through some extensive testing. They have pretty good understanding of accounting standards, and they've also had to work probably in audit or tax or something like that. So it's a pretty rigorous program. It's pretty intense, but yeah.
Wow, but you made it. Determination.
Surprisingly, but I did.
That is good. That's great. I'm sure there was a lot of hard work and drive in that to get to that point. So congratulations on that. Yeah, that's wonderful. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, we spoke about the way you show up in life impacts the way you lead. Tell me, can you expand on that a little bit? I happen to agree. I have my thoughts on it, but tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah. So I think what I see a lot of times with leaders, especially newer leaders or just leaders actually in general, is, a lot of times they have things that are going on, in their life, whether it's, marital issues, whether it's, moving issues. There's something going on. All of us have these kind of, limiting beliefs. And the reality is we all just have stuff that's going on. And I think what a lot of us aren't aware of is how that stuff actually starts to show up into the way we lead. So, for example, if a lot of what I saw, especially when I was working in the corporate world, is if you would have a manager that maybe, or a leader that maybe isn't as confident at making decisions, you might see that they don't make those harder decisions in their personal life. And if they're not doing that, then they're also not making those hard decisions to be the leader they need to be for their teams, for their companies. And then often then we see this downstream impact to the rest of the organization.
I agree wholeheartedly. In my experience in the corporate world and as a leader, I did see that many times. I was always credited with being able to separate my personal life from my work life at 5, 6, or 7, whenever I was able to leave the office. Whatever went on there, I left it there. Yeah, I didn't bring it on the ride home with me. Yeah, I definitely didn't bring it into my home. And once I get home, whatever's going on at home at 6 in the morning when I left for the office, I left it there behind those closed doors. And one of the reasons that I work so hard at doing that is because that's a lot of weight to carry. That is a lot of weight to carry throughout your day. And as you mentioned, it is definitely going to impact the people that you work with. And if the people that you work with need that psychological safety and that autonomy and that flexibility, they're not going to get it if you're not in a position to deliver that. So I definitely agree with that. So tell me a little bit about your intuitive life coaching, your yoga, and your energy healing. I'm relaxed just talking about, just saying that. I feel better. So, so
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, you know what? So I think one of the easiest ways to start talking about it is, the way we think it, I think energy always has an interesting kind of connotation, or like we kind of think really, either we don't really think about it or we kind of think it's like kind of woo or whatever. And so what I
Mhm.
think is really interesting though is like, so what I've been learning a lot with energy is, we want the more that we feel better, the more that, if you want to use terms like raise your vibration or just, feeling happier, feeling, inspired, feeling excited about things that we're working on, that energy is so magnetic. And so when we're thinking about leadership or just fulfillment in life or, things like this, the more that we can feel good and our energy is higher, the more good keeps flowing back into our life. We start finding ourselves in this flow state. We start being a better leader. We start showing up better. We start doing all these
Yeah.
things. And so this has been a huge fascination for me because in my own journey, I've really started to notice how, if I'm on an emotional swing, I can see how now this is impacting the ripple around me. And so if I'm able to show up a little bit differently and I'm able to show up more patiently and have more empathy with myself and, be able to just, feel better really. I can
Mhm.
see how that magnetizes to the world around me. It's like the harder I am on myself and the worse I feel on the inside, the worse everything else is on around me. And the reverse of that is true too.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting because once again, I happen to agree with you, and I struggle sometime to give myself that grace.
Hmm.
Sometime when I've committed a huge offense, and a huge offense for me can be anything from eating sweets when I'm on a diet to, I mean, sometime when I've committed a huge offense and not stuck to my plan or stuck to what I expected of myself, I'm pretty hard on myself. And I will, rather than allow it to seep into my exterior or my outside, being somewhat of an introvert, I'll just go off to myself. I'll just go off to myself and I'll kind of sulk. And my husband and my family, they all know me very well. And they understand that it's not necessarily something I'm upset with them about, because when I'm upset with them, I yell at them and let them know I'm upset with them. It's usually something that somewhere I've disappointed myself and I need to go and just sit and think through it. But one of the things that I've learned is you have to leave that behind. Again,
Hmm.
that's a heavy weight to carry, and you have to kind of leave that behind and give yourself the grace to give it another shot.
Yeah.
That's I think that's something that we all have to learn. So with your intuitive life coaching, how did you go about getting started in that? I mean, that's clearly something that you know a lot about. So how did you get started in that?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's been a bit of a journey, in all honesty. It's been a lot of trial and error. But, when I was in the corporate world, some of my favorite things to do was coaching people. So, when
Mhm.
I think back to some of my best memories over that time period, it was the relationships that I built. It was being able to see people either on my team or, having some kind of an influence to help people move into leadership roles, to move into versions of themselves that they felt better about, helping them. One thing that I used to always say, and well, I still do, is you always want to find, what are some of your best days and how do you have more of those? And what are some of your worst days and how do you have less of those? And so, I've always kind of wanted to be a coach and I've always kind of wanted to do that, but in all honesty, I don't know if it was like my own limiting belief or just because I was so focused on this other path. But in all honesty,
Mhm.
I didn't really realize that it was an option, that I could build a career or build a business being a coach and doing something like this. And so I don't know. So then I'm trying to think of when things kind of flipped. I was kind of struggling, in all honesty, and calling it life coaching for a long time as well, just because I don't know. You hear life coach and
Mhm.
you normally see someone. I'm not even sure what picture to paint, but just, I don't know. Just there's some weird, beliefs, I guess, around that. And anyways, as I was kind of building my business, it started more on the yoga side. I was teaching a lot of yoga classes. Then I started building out some group programs, and most of them all had this theme. They had this theme of personal growth, of healing, of trying to be this better version of who you want to be. And so when we kind of look at all that, it's like, oh, that's kind of like life coaching. And so it
Mhm.
kind of fell into that slowly, and it's something I'm getting more and more comfortable with every day. But yeah.
Okay, so it just kind of evolved then, it started with a thought and then you thought, well, I've really been doing this, but am I calling it the right thing or am I using the right terms? So that's really good and that's fortunate for those around you because it's been my experience with life coaches or healing coaches or whatever you want to call them. It's been my experience that that's how they are all the time, not just when
Mhm.
somebody's paying them to do that, but there's that you have a gentle quality, a gentle aura that's you have a very relaxing personality, and I can see how you would be successful at that. You can't be a life coach or an a healer, so to speak, if 1 minute you're screaming and yelling at the kids, and then when you get on the clock you're playing all this relaxing music and telling your person to just relax and listen to my voice. You know, you
Yes.
can't you can't flip back and forth
No.
like that, so yeah, because it would be too difficult. And I enjoy, well, I used to enjoy yoga. I don't I was never really big into it. It was just something that I wanted to try. And I thought, well, yeah, I can see how this would I can see how this would be beneficial to helping me relax and, live in the moment as opposed to just being all like, I gotta do this, gotta do that. And I don't have no time. It just live in the moment and kind of enjoy the moment. Unfortunately, the yoga instructor at the location that I was going to, she went to another location and they didn't get a new yoga instructor. So, but
Oh
I did.
no.
Yeah, I started that and I did enjoy that. And I enjoy things that are relaxing, such as like getting like maybe foot massages and things like that. I like the quiet atmosphere they set. I like the music that they play. Like when I get my facials, my esthetician, as I always struggle with that, but my my esthetician, she makes the room, kind of quiet and turned down and dims the lights. And then she's got this I guess Eurasian music that, and you can hear water. And I'm like, oh, and then when she's done, I'm like, no, no, just do it again,
Like, don't
you
stop,
know.
don't stop. Yeah.
So again, so I really enjoy those experiences, and I can see how performing that over and over would help you to be that way, that just becomes who you are. So I think
Well,
that's really
well,
cool.
thanks. Well, one thing that I really love is that, that you're trying so many different kinds of modalities, right? Because here's it, like,
Hmm.
there are a million and one ways to relax and to be present and to connect with yourself. And so I think, if it's, getting yourself to a place that is playing the relaxing music and has the right kind of atmosphere for
Atmosphere.
you, right, that
Hmm.
encourages that for you, and that's a place that you feel like, you know what, I can take my shoes off, I can, take off this body armor that I'm wearing all day, and I can just kind of, take a couple deep breaths. Like, that in itself is so powerful, to just be aware of that
Yeah.
working for you.
Yeah, yeah. How nice to work in that atmosphere all day. I come from the corporate world where there's phones ringing, people yelling, meetings, calls, and you're trying to grab a bite to eat at your desk pretty much most of the time. And there's
Yeah,
always deadlines and metrics and goals and objectives, and you didn't meet this and you got to meet that. And and then you do that all day, and then you leave and you come home, and then you come back the next day and you start that whole madness over again. So,
totally.
that's yeah. So I really could have been an intuitive life coach if I'd known such a thing
Yeah, hey, you
existed.
never know, you never know.
I would have tried to, get some education on that. so
Yeah.
so we talked about how you show up impacts the way you lead, and then also you mentioned something about making fast decisions. And I know we also talked about being clear on what you expect. Kind of take us through that. Those are your thoughts on helping build successful teams, and you've done this several times. So yeah, talk to us about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think where a lot of businesses go wrong and a lot of leaders go wrong is they can't find clarity in what it is that they're doing. And a lot of this, I think, comes from, this is where I think when we talk about kind of showing up and wanting to show up in a way that is helpful, we'll call it, or productive, or
Hmm.
maybe effective for cultures, it's that, people are okay with you getting the decision wrong. What's not okay is when we can't make a decision. So, I think there's nothing more demotivating for teams than, and we've all experienced this where it's like, this big decision needs to be made. Or maybe it's more ambiguous and everybody knows a decision needs to be made, but it's not as formal. And everybody's aware, sometimes it's with a team member, sometimes it's with a specific direction for the company, sometimes it's, something totally different than that. But it's like the longer that we're delaying the decision on it, like, are we doing this or are we not doing this? Or are we investing our time here or are we not? And if we're constantly spending our time in this limbo land, then, well, we're just wasting teams' efforts because now they are either completely doing inaction because they're not motivated,
Hmm.
or they're wasting their efforts trying to build something that's just going to get torn down anyways. And
Hmm.
so, from my experience working in teams, is it's not so much about getting the decision right, but it's more about making the decision fast and then pivoting. So just like we were, talking about really quickly before we pressed record was, even with the podcast, it's like always iterating. It's make a decision, iterate, make a decision, iterate. Not every decision is going to be perfect, but the less attached we can get to us having to make the perfect decision and just moving the business forward, you start creating this momentum, just like we were talking about with the energy before. And the more momentum we can create in the business and the more energy we can have behind it, then that just helps to encourage this idea of this high performing team being able to continue to move forward with this momentum.
Awesome. Yeah. I totally understand what you're saying there. You know, um, Indecisiveness can be a culprit that can rob you of much. Indecisiveness can stunt your movement, stunt your growth. And people, especially people who are looking for leadership or requiring leadership, they don't like being around indecisiveness because we're
No,
waiting on you. You're in this position as the leader, then so lead,
that's
it's
right.
like,
Yes.
we're waiting on you to do this. So, let's get it moving. And a lot of times you can cause more problems by being indecisive and waiting on the perfect situation or the perfect answer. You can cause more problems. Like, sometimes if you're dealing with a budget, if you wait too long to make a decision, you're going to lose that money,
That's right.
and,
Yeah.
if it's a project, if you're waiting to make a certain decision and then the project needs to move along, some aspect of that project will pass you up and then it's out of alignment. Then it's
That's
no
right.
longer aligned the way it should be. It's like, well, they've already made the bottle caps. Well, I haven't decided on the design for the bottom. Well, too late. The caps are made. Now you gotta decide. You gotta make a design to fit the cap instead of the cap
Exactly.
being made to fit the bottle.
This is
So
right.
yeah, so that not being quick to pull the trigger and make those fast decisions. And I used
And
to say sometime when I didn't know the best decision to make, I would say, well, I'm going to make an executive decision and ask for permission later. I'm just going to,
yes.
I'm just going to call it, I'll just take together whatever I got, the information that I have. And when they say, well, why did you do that? Well, because I had this, and this, and I knew this and I knew that. So I went with it,
Yeah. Yeah. And it
So,
was more
and that,
important to move it forward than it was
yes,
to make it wrong, right?
yes, yes.
Because I think too, where a lot of leaders get stuck is, that perfect decision and also that disappointment, right? Because you don't want to disappoint whether it's your peers, whether it's the person above you, or whether it's your own team. But I think people, I think people respect the process more than the
Yeah.
actual decision made. And so if it's like, hey, you know what? I gave you my feedback and you decided to go another way, I'm okay with that, assuming that we're moving in a direction. But if you take my feedback or not, and then we're just not making a decision, then it's almost like I feel disrespected, you know?
Yes, yes, yes. And I think, that's why I wanted to talk about the culture of team building on my podcast, because the culture that leaders create is just as important as the knowledge and the skills and any other resources that you have. If
I
there's
almost
a
think it's more
culture,
important.
yes. And if there's a culture of psychological safety where
Mhm.
people, like you say, where people can say, well, I made a decision, it wasn't the right one, sorry, but, I went on what I knew and the information that I had. And if you feel that you can be supported in that, you'll make more decisions. But if you
Mhm.
see a situation where you made a decision or someone did on your team or somebody else, made a decision and they got berated and taken down for that, you're going to get a whole lot less decisions made in that organization. I can tell you that right now,
This is it.
so
Yeah. And
yeah.
people aren't going to be as okay of speaking up or of making mistakes, right? And so then we get into
Mhm.
issues with groupthink or more inaction, or yeah, just like people not actually raising their real opinions on things. And this is where, companies tend to fall into pretty bad spots.
Yeah, yeah. And when people aren't raising their thoughts or their opinions on how things could best go, then sometimes they become, I guess you would call this passive aggressive, where when it doesn't work, and then they say, well, I knew that wasn't going to work. Well,
Hmm.
could we have benefited from that in the beginning instead of now? Well, you guys don't listen to me, or you don't, so, you've got to create a culture where people can bring their authentic selves, where they can bring their best selves, where there's, season it with autonomy and flexibility, and you'll get the best of your people. That's like my team building creed, create a
Yes.
place where people feel safe enough to be who they really are. You hired me as an engineer, let me engineer. You hired me as a manager, let me manage. You hired me as a leader, let me lead. So, but when
Yeah.
you cap that energy, and when you cap your culture so that it doesn't allow for those sprays of innovation and ingenuity, and when you cap that, it's just like putting a top on a boiling pot of water. Eventually, it's just all the water's gonna boil out. You
Yeah.
won't have anything. So yeah.
Well,
Well, I think your concepts are really interesting, and I'm really impressed at how you grew your back office from 40 to 400 people, how you expanded that. Can you just tell us a little bit about that, how that went, how you went about doing that?
yeah. So, um, let's think. So, I mean, when I started it, it was 40 people. So we were in two countries at the time. So we were in Canada and we were in Australia. And honestly, everything was pretty much a mess. So if there's one thing that I've learned about back office and, the back end of a business is there's like a 99% chance that it is a bloody mess.
Mm,
Always. Every company I've been in has been like this. So typically what we see is tools that are all over the place. Sometimes people don't even know what the tools are. Sometimes they don't even have tools. Like maybe the tools are things like Excel or things like, just like standard stuff that we can get because, when the company's smaller, you just don't have that kind of resources. And then as you get funding, and this is the age old balance when we're talking about the sort of internal systems, is that you want to invest enough to get the systems working and to get, the way that I've always looked at the back end of the business is we want to inspire people to not just be moving paper around because it's just a
mhm,
waste of human effort and skill. So humans are really good at logic. They're good at analyzing. They're good at making judgment calls and making decisions. And so we want to, in my view, you want to empower people to be able to do that. And where we can, we want to automate things in the back end so that it's just easier and that information can get passed through to the right people. Because the other thing that we see a lot of times in organizations is that everything is very siloed. So you have sales, you have, let's say, finance, you have HR, you have, whoever's at the front, maybe it's like a delivery team or something. I was working in consulting. And so what you see is that all these teams are so siloed, they don't work together. And so often
mhm,
they're actually creating the same things. Sometimes they're double handling the data. Sometimes, that there's just nothing connecting there. And so if you kind of think about that, when you've got a company that, the reality is most companies can't afford to have a ton of people working in the back end of the office because it's expensive and because it's ultimately a fixed cost on the financial
mhm,
statements.
mhm,
And so if we think about how we kind of built that from 40 to 400, these are the kinds of things that we would think about. So the philosophy behind it was, how do we create systems that are connecting to each other? How do we make sure that the teams themselves are connecting to each other regularly enough so that everybody kind of has an idea at least of what are the strategic projects going on? What are the things that these teams care about? How do we sort of, benefit from them working together in ways that is actually more aligned versus in silos? And then how can we
mhm.
use technology to support this? And so there's always, this balance again of how much do we invest now versus how much we're growing. And so I think that's always a fun challenge.
Wow, that sounds like quite a challenge, particularly when you speak about the collaboration and the communication, because a lot of times, especially the larger the corporation, the more silos you have. You've got all these little tiny little silos, and everybody's got their bit of information and their resources and their tools, and they know what they do. But the department right next to you could be working on the same thing, just a different version or from a different perspective, and now
That's
you've got
it.
all this rework and double work going on. And because you're not communicating, you're not aware of this when you could be collaborating and,
Mm-hmm.
cutting expenses, cutting time, cutting people, the too many hands touching the same thing. So
That's
that's
it.
another one of my biggies is communication and collaboration. We
It's
need to do
huge.
that. Yeah,
Yes.
we've got to do that in order to be successful, or else you just got all of us just running around, you know, everybody built the table leg and nobody built the table, nobody built the tabletop, everybody's working on their version of the table leg,
This is
so
it. Well,
yeah,
also,
so
also, I think when you think about like time and effort and everything, it's like if people are, the more people can be connected and brought into this process, but also make decisions. And so this is where I think fast decisions comes in again. I mean, one of the things that I think did really successfully when I was building out the business operations team is we would get very specific as we were building the technology. It was like, why do we have this field? Are we
mm-hmm,
using this field, or are we just
mm-hmm,
having it here because we think we should have it? Because, how many times are you filling out a spreadsheet or something and nobody knows why? And probably it was
right,
like somebody was like, this looks like a nice spreadsheet. Let's put this together. And nobody looks at the data. Nobody reports on it. The managers and leaders aren't actually looking at it. And so you think like, well, how much effort is going into one, entering the data, two, reporting on it, and three, nobody looking at it, right? So when we're
right.
looking at can we hire a new person, or can we invest in this technology? It's like, well, we're actually wasting this big area of effort on doing stuff that nobody cares about.
Yes, yes. And I used to say when I would run into those situations, I'd say, well, somebody saved their job by creating something that, they were able to sell
Yeah.
one of the CEOs on, hey, we really need this. And the CEO was like, yeah, do it.
Yeah,
Somebody
exactly.
saved
Like
their
that sounds
job.
like a good idea. Exactly.
Yeah, go ahead, do it, so
But
yeah,
there's but
yeah,
there's also
that's
But there's nothing less inspiring than having a job because you are just pushing paper around, like like what I've seen and what I've experienced is it's like you want your job to feel like you have purpose. Like there is a reason why
mm-hmm,
you do what you do because it's
mm-hmm,
productive, it's effective, it's helpful, it's having some kind of impact. And so it's like if we can get rid of this, pushing paper kind of thing, and
mm-hmm.
stop wasting people's time with reports that nobody uses, and instead focus them on really high strategic projects. It's a win-win-win.
It's a win-win-win. I really like that phrase. And yeah, and once again, I agree. I remember several spreadsheets that we used in different areas of different organizations that I've worked in. And I can remember getting on calls to review those spreadsheets. And it always went something like this. Well, last week we were 2 up, but 3 below the week before. And this week we're 1 up, but 2 down from last week. And next week we project to be 3 up. What? Who? I don't even know what you said, so,
Right, exactly.
you
Like
know,
what does this mean, like, and
what, what does it
how do you want
mean?
us to navigate through this? Yeah.
Right. Are we moving forward or no? Because it sounds like we took 2 steps up and 1 step back, and then we took 3 steps to the left. And then, so, I don't know what you're saying. Give me give me this data and in terms that I can utilize it to make my little corner of the world better for the company that I work for. Because I
That's right.
happen to be one of those people that feels all employees, like you said, I think everybody wants to contribute. I think everybody wants to do a good job, and you can zap that out of them, making them sit in those 2-hour meetings, just like what I just described. And,
Totally.
you
Their eyes
don't
are
want
glazing
people.
over.
Yeah, the eyes are glazing over, and they're thinking about, did I turn that light off? And what am I going to cook for dinner? Because they just kind of tune out, because that's not, first of all, it's not pertinent to me.
That's
And
right.
it's not anywhere where I see it as being necessary. But there's stuff on my desk that is pertinent to me, that is
That's
necessary,
right.
that I could be attended to right now. So those are
Well,
some of the things that you have to watch.
I remember one of my favorite things when I was working in the corporate world is like, we used to have a rule, which was like, if I'm not contributing or adding value into this meeting and I'm not gaining any value from being here either, then why am I here? Because,
Yeah.
we don't have a lot of time. And especially when you are in these back office roles, especially, it's like, you are understaffed, you are under resourced.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Your positions are the first ones on the line if the company is kind of going a little sour, financially, or it's an unsustainable time. And so it's like, every hour that you're spending on something matters. And so I think when you start to look at it that way, and you say, hey, like, I need to be adding value here. I want to be working on things that are adding value, and having a culture that supports that, so that people can actually say, hey, this meeting is not adding any value for me, and you were talking about the psychological safety of having that, because what I see a lot of times is the culture doesn't support that. And so, they
Mm-hmm.
say one thing, but if someone declines that meeting, that weekly meeting, everyone's like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
they did
Yeah.
what?
Right. Yeah, especially the person who called the meeting. They're like, you didn't come to my meeting, and then 3 other people over here. Well, she doesn't have to go. Why do I have to go? So,
Exactly.
yeah. So, well, this has been an awesome chat, Jen. I've learned a lot, and I think what you do is fabulous. You've got me wanting to get back into yoga or intuitive coaching or something that's kind of ground me and make me a little more. That's all wonderful what you do. I think it's
Oh,
really
thank
great.
you.
So did you have any like maybe any last words you wanted to leave our listeners with?
I think just one, thank you so much for having me here. It's been so great to be a part of your world and to be able to have this kind of conversation. I guess parting words would be just, you know, for anyone that's leaving this, is just to notice the ripple effect that you have in your own world. Because often, I don't think we
Mhm.
all realize the ripples that we create around us. So the easiest one that I think is like, how we react to our partners first thing in the morning, or our family members. Are we showing up in a positive way, or are we showing up, like negative Nancy showing up? And
Mhm.
however that is showing up is probably going to have a ripple effect in everything else that you do for that day. And so if nothing else, just start to bring awareness to how that's showing up for you.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. And so how would our listeners go about contacting you? And also, do you have anything that you'd like to leave them with, like I don't know, a downloadable or a free gift or anything like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So anyone that's listening here, I'm going to be offering free 20-minute coaching sessions. So just you can reach out to me directly. So you can email me, which I think we're going to have some of that in the comments. But actually, one of the
Yes.
best ways to find me is through Instagram. It's at Move with Jenn with 3 N's. And so you can find me there. My email actually should be in the bio part too. And
Mm-hmm.
just send me a direct message, email me, let me know that you listen to the podcast, and I will get you all set up.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that on behalf of my listeners. So I will put all that information in our promotional materials and our marketing materials when the podcast comes out, so that everybody
Amazing.
has your contact information. And once again, thank you, listeners, for joining us for this episode of Team Building Cultures. We've been talking with Jenn Bieri. She's the founder of Move with Jenn, where she empowers people to become the CEO of their own life through intuitive life coaching, yoga, and energy healing. Sounds like a tasty ice cream sundae or something.
I just loved how you said that too. I was like, perfect.
Yeah, love that. Love that. So thank you so much for your time today, Jen. I really appreciate you having.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you.
We hope we have delivered helpful and enlightening information to help you create your dream team. Join us next time. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Team Building Cultures.